So, first of all, nice to meet you. I'm very happy that you find time for us today, and I hope that we will have a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure is mine.
So, I want to start from saying that the economic crisis that we see today is not a result of EU and USA support for Ukraine, as the Kremlin propaganda tries to explain for everyone, but it's just because the Moscow aggressive policy. So, what do you think? Does society, the West, understand this, or maybe they still have some questions?
Well, I think it's even more difficult than that because the crisis that we are in, the partial crisis, economic crisis that we have, is also the result of us getting out of COVID and the policies that have been implemented during COVID. So, for example, a very aggressive monetary policies and fiscal policies that were implemented during the COVID time have resulted with very significant demand on the side, society for goods and services, and that resulted in shortage. And then now we have oversupply, and so we have this misbalance. And so a big part of what we have today, the high inflation, is actually has nothing to do in big part of the Russian-Ukrainian war that is happening. But of course, what has been added to that right now, and it's coming in play, is Russian aggression and Russian war against Ukraine. So of course it is completely 100% Russia is at fault. Ukraine has no fault at all because Ukraine is a victim in the situation. Russia is an aggressor. They can stop this anytime. They can just pull their forces out of Ukraine, and things can go back to normal. But of course, they're the ones who are choosing not to do that. Ukraine cannot give up their territories. They cannot give up their people and being brutally killed by Russians. That just doesn't make any sense. So the fault is on Russia, and the world understands this. Nobody really blames Ukraine in the West, at least in the United States, for Ukraine causing this, economic trouble. Most of the blame is actually on the government, on the U.S. government, like Biden's administration. That's how the Republicans twist this, and others. Biden administration puts that on Russia. They are blaming Russia. So at the end of the day, it's both. But as I said, nobody is blaming Ukraine.
Well, in your opinion, are the sanctions that are imposed against Russia and the EUA and the USA significant enough to prevent Russia from obtaining excess profits and financing an aggressive war against Ukraine? So, in your opinion, what sanctions should be imposed maybe against Russia more in the nearest future?
Yeah, so I think that what has been proposed today by European Union is actually a very good step in that direction. They posed the price ceiling for the Russian oil. Basically, when you buy Russian oil, whoever buys Russian oil, they cannot pay or sell it for more than a given price. They will be pre-specified, in those transactions. So, and it also goes with the third parties. So basically, that's a fairly significant blow because it will not allow Russia to gain those extra profits on oil, as the price of oil, can sometimes go up significantly. The same thing would be very useful to do on gas and on other resources that are bought from Russia. Now, I would be a proponent to completely ban oil from Russia like the United States have done, right? So the United States completely banned oil from Russia, which European Union can do as well. So I'm surprised that they're still sort of moving in that slower direction, but that's the problem with European politics. There's many players. There is places like Hungary and Germany that have so many ties with Russia that it's so difficult for them to get rid of. And so basically, that's one policy that is already fairly effective, and I think it's going to bite Russia very significantly. On top of that, I mean, the export embargo on or import, depending which country you look in, on technology. So the Russia is not being able to get that technology. Now there's some chemical embargoes on chemical products. And this is super important because you have to understand this is how we destroy Russian tanks. Russian tanks and airplanes cannot be produced without the IT and technology, without the chips and all that stuff. And so it's already have significantly undermined Russian capability to wage the war. I mean, they just don't have equipment. For once, since the beginning of war, Ukraine has actually more equipment on Ukrainian territory than Russia does, partly because they captured a lot, partly because Russia cannot replace that equipment. So these are all good news for Ukraine. And these sanctions definitely are working, and they will be even more severe. God forbid if Russia were, to use any sort of even hint of a tactical nuclear weapon or stuff like that. So, so this is where we stand right now.
Well, to what extent Europe were able to completely abandon purchases of Russian gas and oil, and what are the realistic terms for doing so? What do you think?
Oh, I think they can do it, as soon as the next month. I don't think there's the gas is already on hold, right? So the reserves in the in European countries are mostly at the maximum. So European countries were getting ready for this. So basically, they have stored a lot of gas. Everybody's ready. I mean, it's going to be difficult because they're going to be using only the storage gases, not the gas that is actually that is being pumped through Nord Stream. Obviously, Nord Stream 2 is completely destroyed, but or at least I don't see any near future for it to be restored. So they can do it now. They will be difficult, of course. It'll be painful because they already have prepared for liquid gas from the United States for the delivery of liquid gas. They already prepared for and substituted for Russian oil with other OPEC countries. So they're making the steps, and obviously renewable energy. But the things that would really help in providing alternative sources of energy would be like nuclear power stations, and those are actually taking time to build. So I do expect a lot of more nuclear power, which is kind of ironic that we are, in this nuclear terrorist threat right now, and yet we are thinking of building more nuclear plants just because we don't ever want to be dependent again on Russian oil and gas. So I think those steps will take longer, but Europe is ready. Europe could do it in a very close foreseeable future, especially if United States can guarantee that they will provide the sufficient quantities of liquid gas and oil coming from OPEC countries. So those are the steps that are necessary for Europe to be independent from Russia.
Do you really think that leading countries of EU had no understanding that Russia uses everything as a weapon, what they have, and so this is why it was so easily like to put on the Russia a gas needle?
Well, this is a good question. It's not easy to answer it, right? So I think it's just business as usual. So that's the idea. It's not even really the government that sometimes pulls these strings. It's the businesses that stand behind the government. So, or those business interests. When you have a chancellor of Austria working for the Russian oil company, or a chancellor of Germany working for the Russian oil company, they're getting paid millions of dollars. It's a completely bribing of these European politicians. I mean, of course, these are ex-politicians, but you have to understand that you always have the sphere of influence, because you were in such a top position. And so European Union and European countries, a lot of them have sold out to Russia. Now they being pushed back by the citizens, because the citizens are saying, look, I mean, this is disgraceful. Scholz's support today is what, about 30-ish%. So basically, he will never be reelected again. And he's still using whatever power he has to sort of work on those previous commitments that he had, obviously. But again, he has no political future. I don't see any political future for him in Germany in the future because of his inaction regarding Ukraine. And so these things happen because of these financial ties. So it's simple as that. It's business as usual. And as soon as those financial ties are going to be breaking down, those Russian spies or whatever you call them, you can call the I mean, I don't know how you call the prime minister, former chancellor or prime minister who worked for Russia. I mean, I don't know if you can call him truly a German patriot, because he obviously somebody who bids for Russia and not for Germany. So anyway, as soon as those ties are done, I think it will be much easier for Europe to sort of completely depart from any relationship with Russia.
Well, now Russia is actively threatening Europe with a Russian winter or hunger riots. So, how much could this energy blackmail in winter undermine the economy of European countries, and maybe are they prepared for the worst case scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, this is all Russian propaganda. They painting the worst case scenarios, and they're saying that they're winning the war, which is ridiculous, right? I mean, whenever you hear something from Russia coming, just reverse that in a negative order. They're losing the war, and the winter is going to be fine. Especially in Europe. Europe, as I said, has a lot of reserves for gas, and they will be getting help from U.S. and from the other countries from OPEC, from Saudi Arabia and other countries that sort of will, to be honest, will take advantage of the situation. Nobody is doing this out of their goodwill. Unfortunately, that's the world that we live in. But they will take advantage of this. They'll try to substitute for Russia and make profit. But hey, that's as long as we continue supplying, those energy resources to Europe and undermining Russia, that's fine. So I think it's going to be fine in terms of food hunger. Again, that's not going to happen. Europe is very well prepared. What I'm worried for more, and that is more Ukraine itself. So we have, even though we have a storage of gas and this, but our infrastructure has been destroyed and damaged significantly. So I'm worried about cities like Nikolaev, cities that are being liberated right now. When the winter hits, these cities will have no need of gas because gas is not going to be able to get there. So that's really what I'm worried about, and we need to solve this problem right now. Get the diesel generators and all that stuff that will help Ukraine to survive this winter. I don't see any famine, of course, in Ukraine because, again, unless it's on the territories occupied by Russia, because those territories provide, Russia doesn't provide anything to them. So I'm worried about the Russian occupied territories, first of all. And then, of course, the countries that are much more dependent on Ukrainian grain and, other food supplies. And that will be more countries in the African region. So in Africa, that's where things can get a little bit more troubling than in Europe. But Europe is going to be fine.
Well, at the beginning of September, Russia stopped the transit of gas through the Nord Stream and announced that it will resume it if after the lifting of part of sanctions. And after that, gas prices in Europe have raised to the approximately 30%, if I'm not mistaken. And so can this situation with Nord Stream also affect on the Europe and the potential canceling the sanctions in order to get a cheaper gas?
No, nobody's going to cancel the sanctions. I mean, it would be just it's just not going to happen. This is a dream of a crazy person. So nobody is going to cancel the sanctions. Sanctions are going to only increase. I mean, as long as Russia maintains the aggressive stance and on Ukrainian soil, they'll need to back up completely out of Ukraine to even start talking about any sort of sanction, lifting. I don't think. I mean, Europe has seen too much of the atrocities of Russia and have been betrayed by them so many times. I mean, Russia blew up its own Nord Stream 2 and blamed that on Anglo-Saxons, basically on Europe, to say. So it's just ridiculous. This is not going to happen. This blackmailing is not going to work. So the question is closed.
Well, recently, more and more brands are changing their names and trying to go to return back to the Russian market, and so they try to again to sell their products. So, does it actually mean that the world has adapted to these bans? They are just tired of that all, and they think that the war will go on for a long time, and so how can we stop that? And what are the threats of that?
I mean, Anastasia, I don't know what kind of brands you're talking about because, I mean, if we talk about the major brands, I mean, the major companies, we have over 1,000 top companies that left Russia and not planning ever probably to come back to there until the regime is changed and country changes the direction. So, I mean, you have a company like Siemens, which is a German company that was in Russia since Tsar era, basically 150 years ago. 150 years they were already in Russia and they left Russia. And there's just no coming back, after that. Then you have today, I believe today or yesterday, H&M started just completely dismantling all the stores and really leaving. I cannot believe that H&M will change its brand to just be sellable in Russia. It's just ridiculous. It's not going to happen. Any respectable brand, any respectable company will not do any business in Russia and will not return to Russia. So if there is some small brands that are still trying to adopt and take advantage of the situation, once they become visible, once they become, everybody's going to know about them, they will get such a backlash that I don't think they will, they will regret their own decisions. So I don't see this as happening.
Well, it's clear to everyone that Ukraine is capable of defeating Russia and defending their own territories if we have a strong help of our partners with a weapon. So what do you think? Do the West understand that it is cheaper for them, for their economies, instead of increasing their own armies and opposing most of the territories in the event of Ukraine defeat? And if so, why some countries are still not providing the help that Ukrainian authorities are asking for?
Well, as I said, let me start with the second question. Why some countries are not providing that help that is needed. So those countries, you can count them on fingers, like, Hungary, Germany, they could have done much more. Austria is completely out of the question, which is ridiculous. When I was in Lugano and I've heard the Austrian parliamentary member who basically said how Austria has helped Ukraine, you know what they responded, which was just sickening to me. They said that, well, we help by not abstaining and by not confronting the help that Europe is already providing to Ukraine. So this was their participation by not sabotaging what Europe is doing to Ukraine, which is just sickening to me. And especially given their history with the Nazi regime and everything, they have an obligation before the world. And, again, that just shows me that Austrians have been completely sold out to Russia, at least part of them, of their elite. And so that's the problem. That is the problem. Those are the countries they had too many ties with Russia, Russian business, Russian lobby. Some of them have been under Russian propaganda as well. So those are the reasons, why that weapon is not being sent, why they're not committing more resources. Now, as far as do the countries understand that it's cheaper for them sort of to use Ukraine to stop Russia, I think they do. I mean, that's why the help is coming, and help is coming it's an unprecedented help. I mean, you have to understand, U.S. President Biden has announced that, hey, we're ready to support Ukraine $1.5 billion every month until, this war ends. That's a lot of commitment. We are talking about enormous amounts of money. And that's only the United States. Obviously, it's the biggest country and the most powerful one, but still it speaks volume. So the world understands this. Maybe not to the extent that they should, but they understand that it's cheaper, or it will be less costly for them, especially in terms of the human life and to actually arm Ukraine. Unfortunately, Ukraine is, there's a lot of times people use this argument that Ukraine is used as sort of as a battleground of West against Russia. To a certain extent, that's true. West is not willing to go personally in the fight. So they're using Ukraine to stop this big evil. It doesn't change the fact that Russia is evil, but it also means that, West, at least at this stage, is still not willing to go into the fight.
Well, unfortunately, we don't know how much time this war can last, so we have to prepare for different scenarios. Well, if the war will be long, so how can Ukraine avoid the inflation of the conditions or a protected war with the collective help of the West to be enough to maintain this existing balance right now in the short and in the medium perspective? What do you think?
So Ukraine is, I think, has demonstrated to be super resilient. I'm way beyond my own expectations. I think that if West provides significant assistance and help to Ukraine, Ukraine is actually going to be able to even start recovery even during the time of the war. So yeah, right now we had a huge drop in GDP. So it was about, the World Bank first was pointing out to the number of all the way up to 45%. Now it's 37 was by some economic forum of top economists, and EBRD is right now saying it's going to be 30%. So it's not, it's huge loss for Ukraine, but it's because also the annexation of the big part of the territories of Ukraine and the businesses, if 75% of businesses stopped in the first months of the war, then now it's only less than the 10%. So basically businesses are working if we have the right economic policy that is going to be implemented by Ukraine, and that's very important here because I don't like a lot of things that are happening on the economic policy side. Some of the discussions and what Hitmantsev and his branch has been doing, I'm not very happy with it. But anyway, it's if we are able to do that, I actually see Ukraine is even starting the recovery process even during the middle of the war. And by the starting of the recovery process, I'm meaning the GDP actually growing, and not contracting, which is actually going to be the opposite for Russia. The Russian GDP is going to be contracting for many, many years to come because they have a series long-term consequences. We have a short-term consequence. Well, we have an infrastructure destroyed. That's a long-term consequence. But the business will and foreign direct investment will want to come to Ukraine. They believe in the country. They also believe this is the right thing to do. There is also tremendous opportunity for growth, and that's what they are looking for. The investors, venture capital. Just the last week I met one of the billionaires and in the U.S. who is already collected $50 million that he wants to invest with venture capital into Ukraine and wants to do it now. So yes, we are resilient. Ukraine is resilient, and they will be able to recover even in the midst of the war.
Now many protests are postponed. For example, inflation is restrained due to the fixed exchange rate of the dollar, and tariffs are not raised due to the war. So how will Ukraine get out after the victory from this all? And will it not be a price shock for the population when the dollar, for example, exchange rate released and the tariffs can be raised?
Yeah, there has to be a very smart policy of how to even get out of the controlled exchange rate, right? So obviously, a lot of that, the exchange rate will depend on how the war goes. So here's a scenario. Right now, yes, the inflation is there. The inflation is not only in Ukraine, you have to understand. It's a thing that is happening in the United States. That's what Americans worry the most. They don't worry as much even about Russia or, the war that is happening. They're worried about inflation. And so that's not a thing that is pertaining to Ukraine. And it was already a problem before the war started. So this is what it is. Now, the big part of this will be, imagine if Ukraine actually gets a quicker victory than we expect. And then we have a tremendous inflow of capital, of investment, of foreign direct investment, foreign assets. So if you have billions of dollars that are pouring out into Ukrainian economy, that actually is gonna stabilize hryvnia very well, because now you have oversupply of dollars, and that's the reason why we are, so tied in with the dollar, is because, well, we don't have that much dollar coming in, so it's a difficult control issue but then I think if that recovery happens, and then in the midst of that recovery we move from the fixed rate to the market rate, which will be determined simply by the supply and demand, then in that case I think it will be, you can even see the movement in the other direction. So not in direction of weakening of hryvnia, but actually strengthening of hryvnia.
What do you think? How many time should Ukraine have after the victory to return back to this, to the economical, to the pre-level economy before war? How much time do we need? What do you think? What is your forecast?
Yeah. So the typical figures that I was in London School of Economics, and there was a recovery forum organized by IMF and the World Bank. And so there were colleagues of mine actually from Harvard University that presented the study that showed how the different economies have recovered these significant war shocks. And the typical estimate for these significant wars is, including the World War II and other war-torn countries, is anywhere from 10 to 20 years. So it will take time. So you have to understand that, the destruction of 30% of GDP and so much territory, then, that additional, growth usually is what, 3%, 4%. In Ukraine, I believe it would be higher, but it's, that if we take 3% GDP growth, that takes 10 years to cover the 30% loss. So, but, I definitely hope it's going to be much faster, but it will depend in a big part of how the world takes, their stance with Ukraine, which they will. Again, as I said, usually it's business as usual, unfortunately. And there is a moral component here that is huge, especially for us who love Ukraine, who are part of Ukraine. But for the world, it's usually, is there a business opportunity? And when there is so much aid that is getting to Ukraine, so much reconstruction that needs to happen, the road, thousands of projects, any business will say, well, that's where we should be. This is where we should go. And so you will have Caterpillar, you will have John Deere's, you will have all these big companies that will go to Ukraine because there's an opportunity. It's the moral thing to do. It's the right thing to do. You want to be on the right side of the history. And while you do that, you actually can make money. So I definitely see that happening faster. But 10 to 20 years, that's the typical estimates from these sort of wars.
Oh, well, one more question. In the budget forecast for 2023, the Cabinet Ministry of Ukraine sets for $50 hryvnias at the end of the year. So in general, I think the dollar is like exchange rate is a certain indicator of successful economic in any country. How do you see this forecast, and what can we expect from dollar for the next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good target because it's a conservative target, right? So, it's a safe target, because one thing that they don't want to is for dollar to sort of, to forecast, like, say, an exchange rate of 40 hryvnias or 42, and then for dollar to go up, to 50, then we're going to be in trouble. So basically they are overshooting, I think. That if things continue how they continue now, then I don't even see any reason why for hryvnia to even devalue more than what it devalued now. So a lot of that will depend on the advances of Ukrainian army, and if Russia cannot do any counteroffensives, then I think we would be in a pretty stable situation. Unfortunately, it will be very closely tied to the war, that exchange rate.
And my last maybe question or request is, so how can and should the economy of Ukraine be supported now by even all the citizens? Maybe you can have some tips what should do every one of us to help Ukraine right now.
Yeah, this is something that I do. I mean, of course, on a personal side, we need to support ZSU. We need to support the Ukrainian army in any ways possible. We should give, and we have been giving. It's tremendously what Ukrainians have done already, but more is needed. And we need to understand that at least for the foreseeable future, our quality of life will go down. So we need to, not buy some extra stuff that we otherwise would have bought, and use that money instead to donate to humanitarian aid, to military, whatever you can. I became a co-founder of Global Ukraine Foundation just in the past 2 months, where we already collecting, we have a commitment from ambassadors who join our organization, who manage right now $45 billion worth of assets in the US and in the world. very wealthy people that have committed, millions of dollars that they're already investing in Ukraine and will be investing even more. I'm also a co-chair of Ukrainian American House, and we have already provided millions of dollars worth of aid to Ukraine. Those are the sort of efforts that we all can do. And again, maybe the scale will be different for everybody, and that's fine. That depends, what we can do individually. But this is absolutely what we need to do. I mean, my bank account is empty, like today, because of the stuff that me and my wife we have been donating to Ukraine. And so this is something that we feel this is what the right thing to do, and everybody should be a part of that. That's the first thing: donate, give, support. The second thing that we definitely need to do is to volunteer personally. So volunteer our time. I mean, my mom is a doctor and she lives in Ukraine, and she right now makes camouflage costumes for our warriors. I mean, a doctor. That's her free time task. We can all do things like this, volunteer either in the delivery of humanitarian aid, doing something, helping, and that's the second thing that we can do proactively. Third thing is to be very active voice on social media. Use Twitter, use LinkedIn, use Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever your platform is. Be very vocal. I mean, that's something that I became much more active than before the war. So active that Facebook has already blocked me second time for 30 days. So I'm right now blocked again. This should expire in a couple of days. But anyway, we need to have this voice. And Ukrainians have been very successful, and the world has been very successful battling Russian propaganda, but we need more of that. And everybody, who is sitting at home with a cell phone and connection to internet can do that. So be very active, preferably use English, because we need to speak up to the world community rather than just to the Ukrainian community. So if you can speak English, share English content, be a vocal advocate for Ukraine on social media. That's a huge help. So that's the third thing. And the fourth thing that I think, we as people, as a society should do is just to, invest into our future. What I mean by that, continue things, life as usual. Don't give up on any of your dreams. If you want to get a profession, go for it. Get the education. That's why I became a founding rector of American University Kyiv. This is what we are doing right now. We are in the middle of war. We open a university. That significant part of the investment in that university is coming from America. So this is a great story of what, we can do in the middle of the war. We're still doing what we do on a daily basis. We do business. We, try to live our life in the midst of the war. And that's something that sort of normalcy, at least to a certain extent, that's the thing that we really need to do. We need to learn how to live in the midst of the conflict, in the midst of the war. And by doing, I think, these four things, each and every one of us can help Ukraine win this war.
Well, thank you so much for your words, for everything that you are doing to Ukraine. I appreciate it so much, and all Ukrainians, I'm sure, appreciate it so much. So thank you so much for our conversation. I hope that it was really useful for everyone who will read it or watch it in the YouTube.
Thank you, Anastasia. Thank you for your time.